The ex-wife arrived home unannounced and saw the Mafia boss with the maid. What she saw shocked her. Grace never thought she would stand outside that house again. The large black gate, the tall walls, and the silent guards brought back memories she had tried hard to forget. This was the house where she once lived as the wife of Victor, the Mafia boss everyone in the city feared. She had promised herself after the divorce that she would never return, not even for a second. But life has a strange way of pulling people back into places they believe they have escaped forever. Grace told herself she was only there for some important documents she had left behind during the rushed separation. Still, deep inside, she knew it was not that simple. Her heart felt heavy, and her hands trembled slightly as she pressed the bell. To her surprise, the gate opened almost immediately. One of the guards recognized her and stepped aside without asking questions. That small action made Grace feel even more uncomfortable. It was as if time had not moved forward at all, while her life outside had changed completely. As she walked through the garden, she noticed how quiet everything was. This house was always full of noise before, meetings, shouting, phone calls, footsteps of men who lived dangerous lives. Now, there was only silence, broken by the sound of her own footsteps on the stone path. Grace felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity. She wondered if Victor was even home or if she would be lucky enough to collect her papers and leave without seeing him. When Grace entered the house, the familiar smell of wood and polish hit her senses. Every corner of the place carried memories. She remembered standing in the same hallway years ago, waiting for Victor to come home late at night, hoping he would talk to her, hoping he would notice her loneliness. But Victor had always been distant, cold, and focused only on power. That distance was what slowly destroyed their marriage. Grace shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. She reminded herself that she was no longer his wife and that this place no longer had control over her emotions. She moved toward the study, where she believed the documents were kept. As she walked deeper into the house, she suddenly heard voices coming from the living room. Grace stopped immediately. Her heart began to beat faster. Victor's voice was unmistakable. It was calm, low, and serious, just as she remembered. But there was another voice too, soft and shaky, clearly belonging to a woman. Grace's mind filled with painful assumptions. Her chest tightened, and a wave of anger and sadness rushed through her. For a brief moment, she considered turning around and leaving. But something inside her pushed her forward. She had already come this far, and she needed to face whatever truth was waiting for her. Grace moved slowly and quietly toward the living room. The door was slightly open, allowing her to see inside without being noticed. What she saw made her freeze where she stood. Victor was not standing proudly or sitting on his chair like a king. He was kneeling on the floor. His expensive suit jacket lay carelessly on the couch, and his sleeves were rolled up. In front of him stood Lily, the maid. Lily was young, simple, and always kept her eyes down whenever Grace used to see her during the marriage. Now Lily's face was full of pain, and tears rolled down her cheeks. Her arm was red and burned, and she was trying hard not to cry loudly. Victor was holding Lily's arm gently, wrapping a clean bandage around it with careful hands. His face showed concern, something Grace had never seen directed toward her. He spoke softly, telling Lily to stay still and assuring her that everything would be fine. Grace's breath caught in her throat. This was not the scene she expected. There was no secret affair, no betrayal in the way she imagined. Instead, there was something far more shocking. A side of Victor that Grace had never known existed. Grace felt her legs weaken as memories flooded her mind. She remembered countless nights of emotional pain, times when she needed Victor's comfort and received nothing but silence. She remembered how lonely she felt even while living in a house full of people. Seeing Victor now, caring for someone else with such patience, made her heart ache in a different way. It was not jealousy. It was realization. Grace was beginning to understand that Victor had always been capable of kindness, but he never allowed himself to show it to her. As Grace stood there silently, trying to process what she was witnessing. Ava, Victor's sister, appeared in the room holding a glass of water. Ava looked calm and serious, watching over Lily like a protective family member. Ava had always been different from Victor, more grounded, more honest. She was the only person who ever tried to understand Grace during her marriage. Ava gently placed the glass on the table and encouraged Lily to drink. Then Ava noticed Grace standing at the door. Their eyes met, and the room fell into complete silence. Victor turned around slowly and saw Grace for the first time. There was no anger on his face, no panic. Only surprise and something that looked like regret. Grace realized in that moment that her unexpected arrival had uncovered more than she ever intended. She had not just walked into a room. She had walked into the truth of who Victor really was, and that truth was already beginning to change everything. The silence in the living room felt heavier than any argument Grace and Victor had ever shared. No one spoke for several long seconds, yet so much was being said without words. Grace stood at the doorway, her body tense, her mind racing as she tried to understand what she had just witnessed. Victor slowly rose from the floor, wiping his hands on a towel as if he suddenly remembered who he was supposed to be. Lily lowered her head immediately, fear flashing across her face as though she believed she had done something wrong simply by being seen. Ava broke the silence first, her voice calm but firm, asking Lily to sit down and rest. Lily obeyed quietly, her movements careful, still holding her injured arm close to her body. Grace stepped fully into the room now, no longer hiding in the doorway. She could feel Victor's eyes on her, searching her face for anger, accusation, or pain. What surprised him, and even surprised Grace herself, was how controlled she felt. The storm she expected inside her never arrived. Instead, there was a strange clarity, as if something confusing for years was finally beginning to make sense. She looked at Lily, noticing how young she was, how tired her eyes looked, and how hard she tried to appear small and invisible. Grace remembered being like that once, shrinking herself to fit into Victor's dangerous world. Victor cleared his throat and spoke Grace's name softly, not like a mafia boss, but like a man who suddenly realized the weight of his past mistakes. Grace nodded slightly, signaling that she had heard him, but she did not respond. Ava sensed the tension and gently guided Lily out of the room, telling her that the doctor would arrive soon and that she would stay with her. Lily glanced at Grace with nervous eyes before leaving, clearly unsure whether she was in trouble or safe. Once the door closed, Grace and Victor were alone, standing in the same room where so many unspoken fights had once lived. Grace walked slowly toward the window, needing space to breathe. She looked outside at the garden, remembering mornings she spent there alone, pretending to enjoy luxury while feeling empty inside. Victor remained where he was, unsure whether to approach her or keep his distance. Finally, Grace spoke, her voice steady but deep with emotion. She told him she had not come to create drama and that she truly only needed her documents. She admitted that seeing him with the maid had shocked her, but not for the reasons he might think. Victor listened carefully, something he had rarely done during their marriage. Victor confessed that Lily's injury had happened because the staff was short that day and she was trying to do too much on her own. He said Ava had forced him to come downstairs when she heard Lily scream. At first, he reacted out of responsibility, but as he helped Lily, something inside him shifted. He realized how easily people around him suffered in silence, afraid to speak because of his reputation. Victor admitted that this realization haunted him more than any threat from enemies ever had. Grace listened without interrupting, noticing how different his tone was now, less powerful and more honest. Grace finally turned to face him and asked the question that had been buried in her heart for years. She asked why he never showed this side of himself to her when she needed it the most. Victor's shoulders dropped slightly, as if the weight of that question physically hurt him. He admitted that he did not know how to separate strength from cruelty. In his world, kindness was seen as weakness, and he had built walls so high that even his wife could not climb them. He said he loved Grace in his own broken way but did not know how to protect her emotionally, only materially. The room felt smaller as Victor spoke, filled with regret that could not change the past. Grace felt tears rise in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough during their marriage, alone and unheard. Hearing his truth did not heal everything, but it explained so much. She realized that their divorce was not a failure but a survival. Loving Victor had cost her peace, and leaving him had saved her life in ways she never fully understood until now. Grace told Victor that seeing him care for Lily did not make her jealous, but it did make her sad. Sad for the woman she used to be. Waiting for warmth that never came. She also told him she hoped his change was real, not temporary guilt. Victor nodded slowly, accepting her words without defense. For the first time, he did not try to justify himself or control the conversation. He simply listened. As Grace gathered her documents from the study, she felt something inside her release. The house no longer felt like a prison of memories. When she returned to the living room to leave, Victor walked her to the door in silence. There were no apologies left to give, no promises to make. At the door, Grace paused and looked back once more, not at the Mafia boss, but at the man learning too late how to be human. She stepped outside knowing that this unexpected visit had given her something she never thought she would have, closure, not through revenge or pain, but through truth. Grace stepped out of the house, but her body moved on its own while her mind stayed behind, trapped in the heavy air of the living room she had just left. The gate closed behind her with a slow metallic sound that echoed through her chest. She paused near her car, resting her hand on the door handle, trying to steady her breathing. She had not expected the past to open so suddenly or so deeply. Coming for a few papers had turned into facing years of unanswered questions. As she stood there, memories replayed in her mind, not as sharp pain anymore, but as lessons she finally understood. She realized that the shock she felt was not because she saw Victor with the maid, but because she saw a version of him that had been hidden during their entire marriage. Grace remembered the early days of her relationship with Victor, before he became fully consumed by power and fear. He was not always cold. There were moments, small and rare, when he smiled without calculation, when he listened without checking his phone. But as his empire grew, those moments disappeared. Grace had blamed herself for years, thinking she was not enough to keep his attention. Standing outside his house now, she understood the truth. Victor had been fighting his own darkness, and she had been caught in the middle of that battle. Loving him had meant slowly losing herself, and walking away had been the bravest thing she ever did. Inside the house, Victor remained near the door long after Grace left. He felt a strange emptiness, not the usual silence he controlled, but a quiet that forced him to think. Ava returned from the other room and stood beside him without speaking. She had watched her brother change over the years and had often warned him that power without compassion would leave him alone. Seeing Grace again made Victor confront the cost of his choices. Ava told him that Lily was resting and that the doctor confirmed the burn was serious but treatable. Victor nodded, his thoughts still far away. He could not stop thinking about Grace's eyes, not angry or bitter, but tired and free. Victor walked back into the living room and sat down heavily on the couch. For the first time in many years, he allowed himself to feel regret without turning it into anger. He thought about how Lily had flinched when she first got hurt, afraid not of pain, but of punishment. That fear disturbed him deeply. He realized that people around him did not respect him, they feared him. Grace had feared him too, even if she never said it out loud. This realization hurt more than any betrayal. Victor understood that being a mafia boss had taught him how to control others, but never how to care for them. Lily, resting in her small room, stared at the ceiling, her arm wrapped in clean bandages. She replayed the moment Grace appeared in the doorway, her heart racing with fear. Lily had grown up poor, learning early that people with power rarely showed mercy. She never expected Victor to kneel on the floor to help her. That act alone had confused her more than the injury itself. Ava sat beside her, speaking gently, assuring her that she had done nothing wrong. Lily listened quietly, but her mind was full of questions. She wondered if Victor's kindness was real or just a moment that would fade like everything else in her life. Later that evening, Victor asked Ava to bring Lily to the living room again. He spoke to her carefully, telling her she would receive full pay while she recovered and that her medical bills would be covered. Lily's eyes filled with tears, not from pain, but from relief. She thanked him repeatedly, her voice shaking. Victor felt uncomfortable with her gratitude, realizing how low the bar had been set for basic human decency in his world. After Lily left, Ava looked at Victor and told him that Grace's visit was not an accident, but a warning from life itself. She said that change does not come from fear of losing power, but from understanding why you lost love. Meanwhile, Grace drove through the city streets, the lights blurring slightly as tears finally escaped her eyes. They were not tears of sadness, but release. She felt lighter with every mile that separated her from that house. She realized that closure does not always come from apologies or explanations, but from seeing the truth clearly. Grace knew she would not return, not because she was afraid, but because she no longer belonged to that world. She had faced it, understood it, and chosen peace. As night fell, each of them sat with their thoughts, changed in quiet ways. Grace embraced her freedom with a calm heart. Lily felt hope in a place she never expected. Victor faced a mirror he could no longer avoid. The shock of that unannounced visit had started something none of them could ignore. Life had forced them into a moment of honesty, and from that moment, nothing would ever be exactly the same again. The next morning arrived quietly, but the weight of the previous day still lingered heavily over everyone involved. Grace woke up in her small apartment across the city, sunlight slipping through the curtains and resting on her face. For the first time in years, she did not wake up with anxiety or regret. Her mind replayed the scene from Victor's house, not with pain, but with understanding. She realized that seeing Victor care for Lily had closed a chapter she had kept open for too long. Grace made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the city wake up. She understood now that her strength came from leaving, not staying, and that her life ahead was finally her own. Back at the mansion, Victor stood in front of the mirror in his study, staring at his reflection longer than usual. The man looking back at him seemed older, not just in years, but in awareness. He replayed Grace's calm voice and steady eyes, realizing how much he had underestimated her strength. Ava's words echoed in his mind, reminding him that power without compassion only leads to loneliness. For the first time, Victor questioned the empire he had built and the fear it relied on. He wondered how many people around him had suffered silently, just like Grace and Lily, too afraid to speak. Victor called a meeting with his senior men later that day, but it was different from his usual gatherings. Instead of threats and commands, he spoke with measured authority and unexpected restraint. He made it clear that the household staff would be treated with respect and that any abuse, even verbal, would not be tolerated. The men exchanged confused looks, unsure whether this was a test or a real change. Victor did not care. He felt no need to explain himself. He had reached a point where approval mattered less than conscience. Ava watched from the side, recognizing the shift in her brother and hoping it would last. Lily, still recovering, was moved to a quieter room with better care. She noticed the difference immediately. The house felt less tense, the air easier to breathe. Staff members spoke to her more kindly, and no one rushed her. Lily felt something she had rarely known in her life, safety. She did not fully understand why Victor had changed, but she felt the effect of it deeply. She promised herself that if this kindness was real, she would work with honesty and gratitude, not fear. Grace spent her day meeting an old friend, someone she had lost touch with during her marriage. They talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories of missed years. Grace felt present, something she had not felt in a long time. She realized how much of herself she had put aside to survive a life that was never truly hers. That evening, she wrote in her journal, something she had started after the divorce but never committed to. She wrote about strength, about silence, and about the moment she finally saw the truth. Writing helped her accept that the past did not define her future. As night fell again, Victor sat alone on the balcony of his house, overlooking the city he once ruled without question. The lights below seemed different now, less like symbols of power and more like signs of lives moving forward. He thought about Grace living her life freely, about Lily sleeping without fear, and about the cost of the man he had been. For the first time, Victor did not feel the need to control the night. He felt the need to understand it. Each of them was walking a separate path, shaped by the same unexpected moment. Grace moved toward peace, Lily toward hope, and Victor toward accountability. The shock of that day had not destroyed them, it had quietly rebuilt them. Life had forced change not through violence or loss, but through truth, and that truth continued to work within them, one slow, honest step at a time. Time passed, not in dramatic leaps, but in slow and meaningful changes that settled deeply into the lives of everyone involved. Weeks after the unexpected visit, Grace noticed how different her days felt. She no longer replayed old arguments in her mind or wondered what she could have done differently. The image that stayed with her was not of betrayal or anger, but of truth. Seeing Victor kneeling to help Lily had quietly ended years of doubt. Grace began to rebuild her life with patience, taking small steps toward dreams she once believed were impossible. She enrolled in a course she had always wanted to study and started volunteering at a local women's support center, where she met others who had survived controlling relationships. Sharing her story without fear gave her strength, and she realized that healing did not mean forgetting, but understanding and choosing better for herself. At the mansion, Victor's transformation continued, not perfectly, but honestly. Old habits were difficult to break, and the world he lived in did not reward softness. Still, he made deliberate choices each day to act differently. He reduced his involvement in the darker sides of his operations and delegated more responsibility to trusted people, focusing instead on restoring order within his household and his own mind. The fear that once followed him slowly faded, replaced by a cautious respect. Victor knew he could never undo the damage he caused, especially to Grace, but he learned that accountability mattered more than apology. He began supporting local charities quietly, without seeking recognition, something his former self would have never done. Lily recovered fully from her injury, both physically and emotionally. She returned to work with confidence she had never felt before. The house no longer felt like a place of shadows to her. She spoke openly, laughed more, and even helped train new staff, teaching them that dignity mattered regardless of status. Lily often thought about the moment Grace appeared in the doorway. Instead of resentment, she felt gratitude. Grace's presence had unknowingly protected her, bringing change she could never have asked for. Lily carried that lesson with her, understanding that sometimes one person's courage creates safety for many others. Ava remained the quiet bridge between past and present. She stayed close to Victor, not to control him, but to remind him of who he was becoming. She also kept occasional contact with Grace, respecting her boundaries while offering sincere support. Their conversations were gentle and honest, built on shared understanding rather than shared pain. Ava knew that families were not always defined by blood or marriage, but by moments of truth and mutual respect. One evening, months later, Grace received a message from an unknown number. It was Victor. The message was simple and respectful, thanking her for returning that day and for leaving without anger. Grace read it calmly and chose not to reply. She did not need to. Closure did not require the last word. She looked around her apartment, filled with light, laughter, and life, and smiled softly. The ex-wife arrived home unannounced and saw the Mafia boss with the maid. What she saw shocked her, but it also freed her. That single moment changed the direction of 4 lives, not through scandal or revenge, but through truth and realization. Grace walked forward without fear, Lily stood taller with hope, Ava remained steady in honesty, and Victor learned that real power was not in control, but in humanity. Sometimes, the most shocking moments in life are not meant to break us, but to quietly show us the way out.